Hello, everyone.
Sorry.
While
So this?
our next speaker, Catherine Roberts, is preparing, I'm supposed to be hosting the afternoon sessions. I'm James Westwater, the chair of the Utah Valley Earth Forum. And I thought I would use this opportunity to make a little statement of my own, having to do with how I feel about the environmental situation, air quality, etc. So I've prepared a little short statement here, and then I'll introduce our speaker. What is an environmentalist? My definition is someone who is trying to live in ways that are in respectful harmony and balance with nature, the natural environment, and natural systems. This means trying not to contribute to the one-way consumption of resources and not harming the air, water, and land in the process, and with the wastes we produce. Should we all be this kind of environmentalist? I think we should. Living this way is not and should not be seen as politically partisan. It is an attempt to live as part of nature instead of apart from nature. The Earth is finite. It's only 8,000 miles wide. We can't go on taking from the Earth while dumping our toxic wastes into the environment. The Hopi people have two words that seem to sum up the dilemma we humans face. Suyanaskatsi and Koyanaskatsi. Suyanaskatsi means life of harmony and balance. Koyanaskatsi means crazy life, corrupt life, life in turmoil, life out of balance, life disintegrating, a state of life that calls for another way of living. I hope it's clear to everyone that we need to move from Koyanaskatsi to Suyanaskatsi, a life of harmony and balance. Thank you. Catherine Roberts is the Particulate Matter Program Coordinator for EPA Region 8, working out of Denver, which includes the states of Montana, Colorado, Utah, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wyoming. She is responsible for ensuring implementation of programs for attainment of national ambient air quality standards for PM10 and PM2.5. Over the past 26 years, she has worked in several program areas at EPA, including the Clean Air Act, Superfund, and Congressional Affairs. Prior to joining EPA, Catherine worked for the California Air Resources Board as an associate air pollution specialist. Catherine, thank you for coming.
I have to say we like the EPA.
Well, trying to get myself adjusted here. Take a couple of seconds here to move this over a little bit. Hold on a sec. There's a lot of stuff up here. You wouldn't know that, would you, with this way it's set up? Okay. Well, good afternoon to everyone. I want to thank the Utah Valley Earth Forum, as well as the co-sponsors of this conference, for inviting EPA to your beautiful state to give a presentation on the Clean Air Act and the state implementation plan process. Before I begin, I want to give you fair warning. Some of you may become so hypnotized by what I'm saying that you will become very drowsy and start thinking about taking a nap. Others of you may begin to get a little confounded and start to shake your head and ask yourself, what is this EPA lady talking about? Others may become so enamored of what I'm doing that they will want to know a lot more, in which case I hope to be able to answer the questions that you will have. I wish I was a magician, so that I could snap my fingers and just make all this bad air quality go away, or pull a rabbit out of a hat, but I can't. Instead, I'm going to take you into a rather bureaucratic rabbit hole, the one that I inhabit. So, all kidding aside, EPA is really very, very mindful of the air quality issues that are facing the people of Utah. And I want you to know that we take it so seriously that you will have 100% of our attention and our energy and our efforts, along with the state of Utah, to find a way to not only address the degradation that's already occurred to your air quality, but hopefully to reverse it. So let's start. Let's see if I can do this computer. Let's see, we want to go, nope, I pressed the wrong button already. Use this one? Okay. I may need some help up here. Anybody who's a technical expert with this? I pressed the wrong button, so go to slide.
Wait a second. I thought
Okay.
you said push this.
That's what he told me, that's what I did.
Let's try
But I'm getting this little thing here.
No, it's the right button.
This one is the one I pressed.
This one here. But now she's got this on the screen. How do we get out of that?
EPA always
Okay.
needs technical
Then you
assistance.
Push the right
Okay.
button goes right is the right, left goes backwards.
The many faces of air pollution. Well, you could all look at each other, because ultimately it's all of us that causes pollution. People are really quick to point to industry. They're very quick to point to airplanes and automobiles, the trucking industry, the really large industries like Kennecott. But sometimes people forget about the small sources. And when I say that, I'm talking about fireplaces, I'm talking about wood-burning stoves, talking about the emissions that come from restaurants. There really are a great many sources, and all of them, in a situation that Utah is facing, may one day have to be addressed. Let's go to overview. The first thing I wanted to do, and the topic of this presentation, is to give you a practical guide for the state implementation plan. I'm also going to talk about the Clean Air Act provisions. I'm going to talk about the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, the SIPs themselves, the tools and guidance that EPA uses, as well as what the approval and the disapproval process is. And then I'm going to try to summarize all of this. So here's my practical guide. I think I'm supposed to have a pointer here. Hold on a minute. Handy dandy pointer. Let's see if it works. Can you all see that, or is it too light? You see it? I don't see it at all. Huh. I don't think it's, you can see it, but I can't. Okay, well, I'll forget the pointer. So if you start at the beginning, and if you were to follow all the arrows down, and you were to follow everything that says yes, and you went and you followed all the way up to where it says direct final, the top right-hand corner, go all the way across, it continues to say the word yes. This is the ideal process that EPA and the state both hope to accomplish. If you get stuck in the middle of this diagram, then issues can arise, although I would prefer to call them challenges. So this is, in my mind I was thinking I would start off with simple and go to more complex. In this case, I'm going to start off with a slightly more complex diagram and hopefully walk you through it so you get back down to a more simple viewpoint of what we have to go through in order to get a plan in place. So, the Clean Air Act provisions. EPA's fundamental responsibility, and this is something we do for the entire country, is to set limits on how much of a pollutant can be in the air. It gives EPA a lot of enforcement powers, and it allows EPA to delegate the Clean Air Act provisions so that they can actually implement them. When they do that, they have the authority to issue permits. This is a very significant part of their programs. So permits come under Title V, they come under New Source Review, which is for non-attainment areas, and they come under the Prevention of Significant Deterioration provisions, which is for areas that meet the standards. It also allows the Clean Air Act, the public to participate, and most importantly, it allows for citizens to sue in case a state or the federal government doesn't do what they're supposed to do. Right, Sam? So what are the National Ambient Air Quality Standards? We call them criteria pollutants. You've probably heard about them already. Ozone, particulate matter, carbon monoxide, lead, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide. We have two standards for each of these. One of them is a primary standard, which is based on health concerns. The second is a secondary standard that protects for public welfare and the environment. Today, I'm mostly going to be focusing on the standard that's for the protection of health. Is anybody getting mesmerized or hypnotized yet? It is after lunch, after all. Okay, getting a little bit more complicated here. And by the way, I understand this presentation will be on some website so that you can get all this information later. Is that correct? Yes? Yes, right. So you don't have to take Fast and Furious notes if you don't want to. What I'm showing here, this NPR on the left-hand side, that stands for Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. That's the first step, although there are many steps that precede that. Then we go to a Notice of Final Rulemaking. And I'm pointing out all of these for a reason. If you will look to where it says ozone, EPA got sued on our ozone standard. So as a consequence, we did a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking in late December last year. We will be issuing a new ozone standard in August of this year. The current ozone standard is 75 parts per million. The range that EPA is looking at is 60 to 70 parts per million. The other category I want you to look at is the last box where it says PM. That's particulate matter. And for particulate matter, as you can see, we are going to be proposing new standards for PM10 and PM2.5 in November of this year. We will then finalize that standard in July of 2011. Now we're getting much deeper into even more details. Just to let you know, when EPA looks at standards, we do not consider costs. I know that there's been some discussion previously about costs, but what's important about this point is that EPA is not allowed by the Clean Air Act to look at the costs for protecting health. And what that means is, if an industry comes to us and says, it's going to cost us millions of dollars in order to meet that standard, that is not something that EPA can consider. We have to strictly look at the science. And believe me, there are an unbelievable number of PhDs and MDs involved in looking at the science. It's kind of a combination between EPA scientists as well as scientists who are in the private sector. So you can see where it says, if I had my pointer, it says CASAC. That's Clean Air Science Advisory Committee. We go through this very long and detailed process in order to go down to where it says, where it's red and it says a proposed rule. At this point in time, we are at the stage where we have had a review of what's called the policy assessment. It's a document that EPA staff scientists prepare for the consideration of the Clean Air Science Advisory Committee. We go through several reviews of this, and the public has the opportunity to look at the information that both the scientists and EPA are putting together. And as you can see, we have a couple of different reviews. The important thing is when we go from a final policy assessment to a proposed rule, that's the point in time in which EPA goes into what we call deliberations. Those deliberations are between EPA scientists and the administrator, Lisa Jackson of EPA, as well as our assistant administrator for air and radiation, Gina McCarthy. There's a lot of discussion that goes on between that final PA and the proposed rule. What's important about this is that then EPA issues that proposed rule, and we again go out for public comment until we finally get to the point where we do a final rule. Now this is going to get a little bit into the weeds, but I thought I would let you know, for those of you who may be interested. EPA is looking at two scenarios for changing the PM2.5 and the PM10 standard. I'm just going to focus on PM2.5 because it would take a whole separate presentation to really talk about PM10. The two scenarios, and if I can get this absolutely straight, so pardon me if I get a little confused here myself. There's an annual standard and there's a 24-hour standard. And as you can see, I've highlighted the 24-hour standard at 35 micrograms. The annual standard is 15 micrograms. EPA was sued again. You'll be pleased to know, Sam. Keeping us on our toes, right? Anyway, we were sued and we lost. And some of us were happy about that, others not so much so. And because of that, the court told us to go back and look at the annual standard, not the 24-hour standard. So keep that in mind. So two scenarios. The first one for the annual standard is to look at the potential for 12 to 13 micrograms. Sloshing that ice around. The current annual standard is 15. So obviously this standard would become tighter. Along with this first scenario, the question is whether to keep the 24-hour standard of 35 micrograms exactly the way it is, or to revise it to a number between 30 and 35 micrograms. That's the first scenario that we've asked the public to give us comment on and that we've asked the Clean Air Science Advisory Committee to give us comment on. The second scenario is much tighter. The second scenario is an annual standard between 10 and 11 micrograms. The 24-hour standard would be between 25 and 30 micrograms. It's considerably more strict. The rationale for this more strict standard is based on what's called the Precautionary Principle, which some of you have probably heard of, and basically in essence what it means is that in the absence of perfect information about the effects to human health, it would be more reasonable and more cautious for EPA to choose a standard that's stricter. So you guys still with me on all this? So I'm talking about all of this for a reason. EPA has to review these national ambient air quality standards every 5 years. That's why, if you recall on the slide, 2 slides ago, I showed you that schedule. That's why the schedule's all kind of mixed up, because there are different times in which we go through this 5-year review. If EPA changes those standards, that means that the entire country, every single state, must go through a process of evaluating whether or not an area meets the standard, as in attaining the standard, or does not meet the standard, as in non-attainment of the standard. The state has 1 year from the time that that standard has been made effective. They make recommendations to EPA, and EPA, after we receive those recommendations, have 1 year to make a decision. We recently did this. As I'm sure you're all aware, EPA made a decision about PM2.5 non-attainment areas for the state of Utah. What's important about all of this for you all is the fact that for the first time ever, so I'm told by my OGC, that's Office of General Counsel attorneys, for the first time ever, EPA allowed for a 30-day public comment period. The Clean Air Act has no provision in the specific section of the Clean Air Act that deals with designations. It does not say that EPA or the state has to hold a public comment period. But many people at EPA felt that this was important. In the case of Utah, I would just like to say that many of you did give us comments, and we are appreciative of that. In the future, when that ozone standard comes up, because that's what will be happening next, if you recall the schedule that I showed you previously, the next thing that will be happening is non-attainment and attainment designations for ozone. Once we've made the decision, we publish it in the Federal Register, and depending upon whether or not we're being sued again, we sometimes can have 30 days before it becomes effective. Sometimes we say 60 days. Okay, this is the slide that usually gets everybody's attention. These are the Utah PM2.5 non-attainment areas. The only thing that's missing here, you see that 40 up there by Cache County? I presume you all can see this. I couldn't get the coloring in on that. That really should have a separate color because that 40 represents Logan. And in fact, Logan is its own separate non-attainment area. And in the case of Logan, it was combined with part of Franklin County, which is located in Idaho. So, top to bottom, these numbers basically represent what is called a design value. It's the 98th percentile. These numbers are used for when we do the non-attainment area designation. So what these numbers represent right now is a preliminary number for 2007 through 2009. Just so some of you will understand this, every year this number changes because every year it rolls one more year forward. So when we did the designations for non-attainment areas in Utah, we were looking at the data for 2006 through 2008. So the numbers were slightly different, although they were close. These are the numbers for 2007 to 2009. These are currently available on the state of Utah's database, as well as EPA's database. However, they are still in a sort of state of yet to be what we call QA/QC'd, quality assured, quality control, in terms of the actual numbers. So roundabout somewhere, according to my monitoring people, say middle of May, these numbers will become final. Next year, you'll see a different set of numbers. But as you can see, starting with Box Elder, and I just want to point out, Box Elder is a partial county non-attainment area. We didn't use or didn't include the entire county. We only included that area that we felt represented sources of air pollution, as well as population and a few other things as well. For Weber County, it's only a partial county. We didn't put all of Weber County into the non-attainment area. Davis County, however, the entire county is included, as well as all of Salt Lake County. For Tooele, again, we only did partial county. And for Utah County, it's only a partial county. If you're wondering what those little grids are on there, those little squares, those are townships and ranges. So that's how EPA did the designations. We looked at township and range in order to make it very, very clear, especially for industry, what the actual non-attainment area looks like. Hold on here a second. I'll let you look at that map while I turn a few pages. Micrograms per cubic meter. 24-hour standard. We designated for the 24-hour PM2.5 standard. The good news for Utah is that you are meeting the standard for the annual. Remember, that's 15 micrograms. It's very good news, actually. 24-hour average means we look at it, the pollution levels over 24 hours, and annual is over the entire year, an average over the entire year. I guess the other little point I wanted to make, and it's really not such a little point, it's really a rather large point, and that is, as you can see from this map, you guys have major issues when it comes to topography and meteorology. But I am sure that the previous speakers covered all of those issues in some detail, so I'm not going to belabor the point. It is a challenge for you, but it's also a challenge for other parts of the country. For instance, the Los Angeles Basin. The Los Angeles Basin, I think, is non-attainment for just about every single standard that EPA has. And they are also challenged by topography. They're in a basin, they have the Sierra Nevadas blocking their air, and they have 10 million people. So it kind of all adds up and produces really bad air quality. All right. Now we're really going to get into the rabbit hole, so bear with me. The Clean Air Act requires a plan to achieve these national ambient air quality standards. The SIPs are a framework, and they have to find control measures that will work. Each state is responsible for developing those plans to demonstrate how those standards will be met. The SIPs also have to be updated regularly. And keep in mind that SIPs are in place not only for attainment and non-attainment areas, but submissions from the state submissions from the state to EPA can also just be for rules that they've adopted, or perhaps EPA, because of a court-ordered document of some sort, another lawsuit, has to change some rules and regulations. And as a consequence, the state has to evaluate those rules and has to adopt them. So the SIP really is a kind of a living document, so to speak. Okay, now I'm really going to mesmerize you with this is the SIP. It probably should be a black hole, but it probably wouldn't look so good on the screen, and purple and yellow looks a little better. But these are all the components. We have legal authorities, resources, source surveillance, enforcement, permitting, voluntary and non-traditional measures, mobile measures, mission limits, rules and regulations, control strategy, demonstration, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to try to go through these in a little bit more detail for you. What are the tools? Well, basically, when you're going to do a big PM2.5 attainment SIP, one of the most fundamental things you need is to have an emission inventory, which the state of Utah does an excellent job of preparing. It's a very arduous process to try to collect emissions data from every source that is regulated. You can actually go and look at what's in the emission inventory if you're interested in doing such a thing. There's an excellent series of air quality monitors for the Wasatch Range, and I think a previous speaker talked a little bit about those monitors that are all up and down the Wasatch Front, all the way from Box Elder, all the way down to Utah County, over to Tooele County, and other monitors that are also throughout the state. So that information, the inventories and the monitoring, that information is compiled by the state, who then is responsible for doing an air quality model. When we say model, we mean a very, very sophisticated computer model with so many mathematical equations that unless you're a mathematician, it's like impossible to understand how they actually do all this stuff. So I'm not even going to try to explain it to you. Fundamentally, the models are used to verify that the kinds of controls that the state thinks are going to be appropriate will actually work, or as we say, demonstrate attainment of the standard. So what are the SIPs? This is just elaborating a little bit more detail. As I've mentioned already, emissions inventory is needed. You have to develop a strategy. You need to do the modeling. You have to compare it to the standard. You have to adjust your strategy to see if it still works. The state has to draft all of these rules to implement this strategy. Then they have to adopt them. You have to have public participation. You have to give it to EPA, and EPA has to do a rulemaking. And already, heads are beginning to nod. Oh dear. Okay. What guidance exists? Well, it's statutory, regulatory, policy and guidelines, court decisions. The thing I think I'd like you to focus on is where we say 40 CFR, parts 50, 51, and 81. For those of you who are really interested, you can dive into those particular sections of the law and look at exactly what's required by both EPA and the state in the preparation of a SIP.
I'm sorry, could you put that back?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you'll have them.
Trying to ask, where does the funding go to support the state's work to meet the EPA compliance? Where is that?
EPA gives money to the states.
So that is federally funded.
Yes, and also the next speaker is somebody from the state. She can probably elaborate more on state funding, but yes, EPA provides money through Section 105 of the Clean Air Act.
That just helps answer previous statements about funding.
Mm-hmm. Welcome. All right, we're going deeper, and I am not going to give you a speech about each and every one of these pieces of guidance, because this would take a few weeks to go through all of this stuff. But as you can see, I've given you the names, and I've given you the websites, so in case you really want to dig into all this information, you will have it all quite handy. So, the emission inventory guidance, the modeling guidance, road dust guidance, 110A guidance, and even deeper, there's more. The PM implementation rule, which is something that I specialize in. This is the document that really guides how everything has to be pulled together. We issued this guidance in April of 2007. We are getting ready to issue a new rule, and this one will be for the 24-hour standard. The one that we issued in April of 2007 was for the previous standard that we had set. So since we changed that standard, we actually went from 65 micrograms for the PM2.5 24-hour standard down to 35. So since we made that change, we have to revise this rule. I'm expecting that it will be out somewhere around about October or November maybe, but don't hold me to that because it might take longer to do. The other one is the transportation conformity, which is a whole nother rabbit hole. And I mean, this particular rabbit hole really goes deep, and there's many, many people who are involved in it. The Federal Highway Administration, as well as the state folks who are involved in looking at it. But for those of you who are interested, you can go to that first web link, and it will give you an entire overview of what's involved with transportation conformity. And if you go to the last one is what we have recently done, and it's called the MOVES model, M-O-V-E-S. So for those of you who are into transportation stuff, that's the place to go to get all the most recent information. You have a slide that disappeared? Oh. How weird. Why is that happening? Clever. I just keep hitting it and the next one appears. It's all there. Okay, who's been playing with this? Okay, so the approval process. SIP comes from the state to the EPA regional office. It does not go to DC. And it has to happen 3 years from the date of the designation. So that means December of 2012, the state has to give us a SIP. And it must show that they will attain that standard by December of 2014. The regional administrator signs to approve, and EPA goes through a process of determining whether or not it meets all of the Clean Air Act and EPA regulations. EPA gets 18 months from the date of the submittal to approve it. And that's again where we oftentimes get sued. Sometimes we just get slowed up for various reasons and just can't quite get it all together. And so we ourselves sometimes miss these deadlines. This is the general state process. I'm not really an expert on the state process, and Stacy's going to be talking next, and so she can probably clarify this slide if I don't really have it specific for the state of Utah. This is just looking generally for all states. The key thing is SIP revisions usually go through an environmental board, And you all here in Utah do have a board. There's always a comment period, there's a public hearing, the state has to prepare a response to those comments. Sometimes there's a legislative review, that's in Colorado. I don't know if it applies here to Utah. Then they have to formally adopt and then submit it. Here's our specific rulemaking process. We take that state submittal. Sometimes EPA has to prepare additional technical support documents. We propose the action in the Federal Register. These are all of our choices. Partial approval, limited approval, conditional approval, approval, disapproval. It's kind of crazy. My preference is for number 4, just an approval of what the state has submitted, but that doesn't always happen. We also have to allow for a public comment period, and we have to respond to those comments. So who are the stakeholders? All of you. There are many, many stakeholders, and we get comments from people not only, like if we were looking just at Utah, we could get commenters that are outside of the state of Utah on a SIP. If a particular industry, for instance, thinks that it will affect how they do business. Environmental groups, those are often based nationwide. So we can get comments from a great number of people. And most importantly, you, the public. We get comments, a lot of them, from the public about what they think is necessary. Oh, here we go again. Ooh. This is a great slide. This is the one where everyone's eyebrows usually raise up. This is what sometimes happens when EPA has got a SIP submittal that we can't approve. And here are just some general ways in which we can't approve it. Doesn't meet the rules. The regulations are vague, misses testing methods. There's no technical justification. It's incomplete. It's not enforceable. There's been a regulatory relaxation without giving us documentation for why that's necessary. There's no national consistency with other SIPs from other states. This is a very important point because it really goes to the issue of trying to create what some call a level playing field, if you will, in which you really can't have one state not meeting requirements or regulations and another state doing what they're supposed to do. So we have to make sure that the SIPs are consistent across the board. And backsliding. This has to do with the impact on other criteria pollutants. This is an example. This is just one sentence in the Clean Air Act. Think about it, one sentence in a 400-page long document. This is called Section 110L, and this has to do with backsliding. It probably took, a room about this size, filled every seat with lawyers to come up with this one sentence. And what's important about this sentence is the wording of it. It says the administrator shall not, it doesn't say may not, it says shall not approve a revision to a plan if the revision would interfere with any, another good lawyer word, applicable requirement concerning attainment and reasonable further progress, or any, again, other applicable requirement of this act. This is EPA's way of making sure that all the SIPs that we get are as protective as possible and more or less bulletproof. Of course, we know that, we're not totally bulletproof, right? That's right. So this one always usually gets people's attention. Sanctions. You'll hear about sanctions in the press a lot. The idea of sanctions makes many people very nervous. The bottom line is that nobody wants to go down this path. The state doesn't want to go down this path. EPA doesn't want to go down this path. And the staff and the managers at the two agencies work tirelessly to avoid going down this path. And as you can see, it's very time and labor intensive to do that. But if in fact we don't receive a SIP submittal by December 2012, then EPA by law must initiate a process that's called a failure to submit. It starts an 18-month clock. During that time, the permit requirements for new source review, and these, by the way, are more stringent permit requirements as compared to the requirements under the Prevention of Significant Deterioration. Those change. The Federal Highway Administration is required to impose funding, moratorium, key word, moratorium, for all but exempt projects. Another key thing to remember when you're reading about this. And those exempt projects are for safety and mass transit. The state air grants, you were asking about the funding. Well, that Section 105 grant funding can be subject to a moratorium as well. And the worst part of all of this is the last bullet. If for some reason a state does not give us a SIP on time, then I get to do all the work to write a federal implementation plan. And I assure you, that is not something that I want to do. So this is the easiest practical guide of the whole slideshow. If you remember the one that I had in the beginning, this is the very, very abbreviated one. Basically, Clean Air Act, attainment, non-attainment designations, or we get a lawsuit that initiates the process for doing a SIP or to making revisions to a SIP. The state governments go through the preparation process, they give it to EPA, we review it for completeness, then we begin the process to propose it in the Federal Register. We look at it in terms of if we can approve it or if we can't approve it after we look at all the comments that we receive and that we respond to. After we approve the SIP, it becomes federally enforceable, which is very key. As long as it's federally enforceable, as long as it's a SIP, then that means you as a citizen can sue if you want, Sam. Only if you want to. You pretty much want to, yeah. So, if for some reason we can't approve it, then I get to do a federal implementation plan, which, as I've said already, is not the thing that I ever want to have to do. And that basically is it. That's my presentation. So I hope you enjoyed it. Does anybody have any questions? Yes. I'm not an expert in carbon monoxide. Oh, carbon dioxide. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Carbon dioxide, as everyone knows, is a very controversial subject. EPA issued what's called an endangerment finding, and that is sort of a fundamental first step for EPA in terms of how we might go about regulating sources. However, President Obama, as well as our administrator for EPA, has made it very clear that their preference is for Congress to address this issue. And I believe Congress is working very hard to figure out a way to come to terms with the carbon dioxide issues that are confronting our society. Well, the Federal Clean Air Act, yes. I mean, you know, essentially by doing an endangerment finding, as I said, that's the first step. Subsequent steps have sort of been taken to a certain degree, but I'm not an expert on it, so I don't really want to give you details about it because I might not give you the right ones. But there are some Federal Register actions that are out there that are looking at ways that we could possibly, although it's not our preference, so I'll make that very clear, regulate very, very, very large sources of carbon dioxide, and certainly not small sources. Yeah?
Yeah,
Oh,
I think we
okay.
better withhold our... We're
Or
about
you can ask me
50
later. Okay.
Thank you, Catherine.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Can I get this? We need to like...
I don't know how to do that.
Okay, where's
Check
our
with us later.
technical expert on our computer? Oh, there he is.